going on in our head. So microaggressions. Microaggressions can be a statement, an action, or an incident regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, such as a racial or ethnic minority. A very popular microaggression is, can I touch your hair, or is that your real hair? And this is a very good example in terms of how brief it actually happens and how small or coincidental it may seem to the person who is perpetrating this microaggression. So when you touch an individual's hair, you're actually invading their personal space. You're aiming for their face. You can also think about the time we talk about microaggressions being very brief. This often occurs within seconds, and by the time the person has asked you, can they touch your hair, they've already done it. And so you already feel like you're even violated. Other microaggressions include, oh, you speak so well and so articulate. As if you have a Southern dialect, or if you have a Black dialect, or if you have like a Spanish dialect, that would mean that you are not as smart, or they make judgments about who you are and how you communicate and how bright or what your intelligence level is or how highly educated. Your English is so good is another microaggression. So all these things make people feel defensive and they make them feel discriminated against. So those are examples of microaggressions. Acculturate. So acculturate is an important word to speak about because I think a lot of people get acculturate confused with assimilation, and they are two very different concepts. So acculturate is defined as the process of learning and incorporating the values, beliefs, language, customs, and mannerisms of new country immigrants or people into their community. That's a culture. That's what it means to acculturate. Assimilate is something that's very different. Assimilate is when the minority culture is fully absorbed into the majority culture. And so that's an important difference. And if I can give you an example of assimilation, it would be back in the early 1800s when the Irish were in the United States during the potato famine. They were different, right? But they had the ability to assimilate into American culture because they had phenotypic features that made them look white or Anglo-Saxon, and so they could like shed their identity of being Irish and assimilate into the majority culture. For Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, that's something that we cannot do. So as much as we are able to acculturate or get accustomed to our new society or wherever we've immigrated, we won't be able to assimilate our features. We're still going to have the same hair texture. We're still going to have the same skin color, the same facial features that make us our particular ethnic group. And so assimilation can be very unhealthy. So that's the difference between acculturate and assimilate. Examples of acculturating are code switching. So most people may not know this, but a lot of people who are BIPOC, when they are at home, they speak a totally different dialect of English. And then when they are at work. And the reason why they do that is because they know if they speak the dialect of English at home, they are being judged differently from their social group, and so they can feel isolated. Moving on, we have the definition of racism. So racism is defined as a systematized discrimination or antagonism directed against people of color based on the belief that whiteness is superior. Racism is a form of oppression based on skin color or on phenotype. So an example in American history would be Jim Crow. So There were laws, that were systematized that discriminated against African Americans, prevented them from voting, prevented them from using the same restrooms, prevented them from using the water fountains, and also made sure that they were very much separate from the other races. And oftentimes, those policies led to inequalities and inequities. After Jim Crow, so to speak, came redlining, which is a process of putting African Americans in communities that have very limited resources, higher than normal bank loan amounts, and things of that nature. And then there's the criminal justice system, which incarcerates African Americans and other people of color at higher rates than they do for their white counterparts. Prejudice. Prejudice can be defined as a feeling of unfair dislike directed against an individual or a group because of some characteristic. It could be race, it could be religion, and these are preconceived notions that based on physical traits. An example of this is thinking that certain people are dirty just for the color of their skin, or not as intelligent for dirty, or making insensitive remarks to them just because of who they are based off of their features. And so that would be prejudice. Racial inequity. We've heard a lot about this over the summer of 2020 due to COVID, also due to the death of George Floyd. But racial inequity is defined as unfair, unavoidable differences arising from poor governance, corruption, or cultural exclusion. And so we saw COVID-19, where African Americans and Latino Americans were disproportionately affected by COVID-19 and being frontline workers, also disparities in those who died. And we still see it in our underrepresented minorities in medicine. There are reports coming out that over the last 30 years, the number of underrepresented minorities in medicine has not changed very much. Resilience. Resilience is defined as the capacity to emotionally and mentally cope with difficulties or crisis. And this is something that, I wish that we really didn't have to really talk about people being resilient. It would be nice if if this went away. And the reason means that if we got rid of resilience when it came to talking about racism or being anti-racist, that meant that we saw the problem of racism in our country, but we haven't. The system is just set up through these microaggressions at time that make it very difficult for people to heal. Sometimes you have to be stronger in all the broken places. And so we have to be resilient, and we have to think about ways to cope. And it has to be like rather quickly so that you can go on and show perseverance. Intersectionality is another word that has become very popular lately. So I think a lot of people think of intersectionality as where your race may meet your gender. But really, when people talk about intersectionality, when it comes to fighting racism, it's the overlapping forms of oppression or interlocking forms of oppression. So this would be, I am a Black woman. I am a woman. I am also Black. Being discriminated upon just for being Black is different, than just being a woman. I actually have two things that now affect how I deal with racism or how I'm being perceived in society. And so you can consider that like gender racism. And then lastly, we have misogynoir, which is a rather recent term within the last like 10 years that came about. Um, African American women have been dealing with this over the last 4 years, especially amongst political theater. I think about the squad and how the squad was treated differently amongst other reporters and during press conferences by, the former president of the United States, um, the comments made against Maxine Waters, uh, Kamala Harris, and Michelle Obama. So really, it's hatred that's directed at Black women. So that's just a little bit about the nomenclature that we wanted to give you. Dr. Bradby, is there anything else that you, or Dr. Lopez, is there anything else that you wanted to say about the nomenclature?
So I think a lot of you probably know most of those words or recognize them, and I know a lot of them have been talked a lot about this year in particular, and preceding that. But I think since we have had a very large social justice movement last year and continuing into this year, I think it has shown up more and more, not only in our like in academia, but like just in everyday conversation. But we did recognize that these words mean different things to different people. And so we thought it was important to just go over it so that we can all be on the same page today.
Just like lastly, I just wanted to also talk about what it is to have like privilege, and also to what it is to be an ally. Because I think a lot of us, that's why we're here. We want to know like how we can be better allies, how we can use our privilege to actually change what's going on in academic medicine. And so, when I think of like privilege, it's a set of unearned social and economic advantages that lead to inequality as a result of skin color in America. Um, Again, like for privilege, it's not being followed in the store if you're Black or brown. For me, it's like if I get pulled over by a cop, not fearing for my life that it could easily go left just because of the color of my skin. And I lose, the fact that people may know that I might be a physician or a respected member of the community. I am now like subject to a lot of biases that might come into someone's head when they're pulling me over. And then just lastly, it's just like allyship. So this is any person that actively promotes and aspires to advance the culture of inclusion through intentional, positive, and conscious efforts that benefit people as a whole. And an ally is someone who is very deliberate in what they're trying to do when it comes to anti-racist work. Some examples of some of the allies that I've had are people that I could go to and talk in confidence about some of the things that I've experienced at work. Allies who actually bring diversity to the table. They know that their fellowship, their program may lack in diversity, so they actively recruit or they bring people to the table who are different from them. Um, the hard part is they speak up even when it's not convenient for them. So that's really a good ally. Um, Anti-racist allies, ones who actually want to reverse the work of racism. Uh, and then they go back and they do the work within their own community to dismantle racism. So they talk to their own peers about their own biases and some of the stereotypes and how they've been racist, or how they might have viewed race to kind of dismantle it. And then just lastly, I just leave like this last thought here. No one has to answer it out loud, but it's just something for you to consider. It is, what are you willing to give up? And I think that as an ally, that comes up a lot when we talk about allyship. What is it that you're willing to give up? So that is my presentation on at least a few of the nomenclature. Um, So you'll be participating in several breakout sessions involving some role playing for simulation. We just have like a few rules of engagement. And we do this for all of our simulations at our center, is that everyone's going to exhibit professional behavior. We'll promote a professional learning environment. The important part or the goal is participating in critical reflection. We really need you to participate in critical reflection so that you can get the most out of this program. Be polite, be respectful, and to be curious. So those are our rules of engagement for our simulation session for the breakout rooms. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bradby. I feel like we're just right on a session. So
we are like right on time, guys. I'm super excited about that too. If y'all can't tell, excitement is my theme for this morning. I am definitely caffeinated now. So next up, we are going to have a 20-minute breakout session talking about our own experiences with microaggressions and talking about how it makes us feel, and kind of breaking down how it is that these microaggressions occurs. So thinking about how we are socialized to think, and then what barriers kind of prevent us from speaking up when we witness them. Because let's all be honest, we've definitely heard interesting things in the clinical space, sometimes interesting things in our learning environments, in our classrooms, and definitely on the street. And so what do we do when those things occur, and how have we addressed them personally in the past, or what's kept us from doing that? And so we have 3 breakout rooms that the great SAM staff are going to put us in, and then we will regroup and kind of summarize what each group has talked about. SAM folks, are we good?
Yes, so we have you just automatically generated into a group. So I will open up the rooms and then you will all be put in.
But it is what it is. So just be aware of that. So I hope it doesn't, mute our conversation too much, but just be aware that the other 2 rooms aren't being recorded. I've chosen to be me, partly because I'm the most senior of the 3 of us who are doing these sessions. So again, just keep that in mind, and hopefully that won't affect us, but I just wanted you to know up front. Just real quick, I know a couple of you, I don't know a couple of you, and I don't know who knows who, but if you could just brief introduction, since we're going to be together for much of this session, if you could just introduce yourselves. Let me go, Tiffany.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany Mitchell. I am a new ER attending at Mount Sinai in New York. I've been working with ADIEM as I guess the head of the Social Media and Publications Committee for the past couple of years now.
Wow, new, like this is your first year out?
Mm-hmm.
Good for you.
Brand new.
Congratulations.
Good, good to be done.
The training wheels are off.
Yeah, everybody's look, when you finished your residency, the day after you became all knowledgeable, and everybody's
immediately
to you.
Right.
I think I got dumber, actually. I don't know what. Looking around like, wait, did I learn this?
All right. Next, is it Nexer?
Yes, it's Nexer.
Nexer, go ahead.
Good morning. I'm about to graduate medical school like in 20 days from now, and I just accepted a position as a simulation TA at St. John Episcopal.
And
Cool.
are you going into emergency medicine?
I'm gonna apply for 22, and yes, that's the goal. That's the heart. That's what it says.
Good luck.
All right, great. Well, Nexer, good to have you here.
Thank you.
Michelle.
I'm Michelle Blanda. I work for an insurance company now. I was a practicing emergency medicine physician for more than 30 years. I was a chair of a large department. I was a research director. That's why Bernie and I go back a long time. However, now in the company that I work for, we do cover a large Medicaid population. And so the social determinants of health that kind of affect the population have, really come to heart, especially during the pandemic. And so, and they really do all the time. And so, the idea that I continue to become more knowledgeable and gain wisdom is important as a leader in the organization. So that's why I'm here.
Great, great. And Jonathan?
I am John Rubin, emergency physician at Medical College of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. Actually, I have a Philadelphia connection. I trained at MCP when it was still MCP, and lived down the street from Jeff. But I came out here. I came to Milwaukee for EMS fellowship and have stayed put ever since.
Good.
That's great. That's great. So wow. So you've been around for at least a little bit, if you called it medical college.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm not a new attending.
All right, so looks like we have a little bit of a range. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Bernie Lopez. So as Michelle mentioned, we grew up together in SAEM research largely. We would present research and we would kind of be traveling in the same circles. So yeah, I was, my first research presentation at SAEM was in 1989. I was a third-year resident just finishing up, and that was my first one. And I think that was when SAEM actually formed. So I've been around for that long. So yes, I am not a new attendant. Tiffany, I'm kind of opposite from you right now. But yeah, I'm I'm professor, executive vice chair in the Department of Emergency Medicine at Jefferson. A lot of my work though nowadays is in diversity and inclusion. I'm the senior associate dean for diversity and community engagement in the medical school and the provost for diversity and inclusion at the university. So I spend a lot of time in this area. And my area of focus, just going through emergency medicine, I had a couple different areas of focus. My area of interest is in unconscious bias and microaggressions. And it's, I don't know, it's just what interests me. So, well, good. Well, it's good to have you all. And I hope we have a good morning together. So again, the idea is best as you can, participate as much. We're really interested in your thoughts on things. We have a wide range of viewpoints of the world based on where we are right now in our lives and in our professions. So here's the scenario. This is I'm going to read to you a scenario. This is the simulation piece, and then we're going to talk about the scenario. All right, so 2 hours into a patient's hospital stay, you hear your patient loudly complaining on the phone that he has been in the ED forever and has still not seen the doctor, and that he's going to file a complaint with whoever is in charge. At this point, the patient has been seen by the all-female physician team, medical student, resident, and attending.
Did you guys like record my like my most recent shift? Like, what's going on?
So Tiffany, you've experienced this.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, it's really frustrating. I think for me, it's frustrating. Literally the exact same I've scenario I've had, because your desk is right in front of the patient's, space. And so no joke, I have seen a patient this is when I was a resident, talk to them, explain the whole plan, giving them, very clear cut, expectations for what we're going to be doing while they're there. Go back to my desk and they are on the phone saying that nobody has seen them. Nobody's seen them. And I literally stood up and I said, I just talked to you. Like, I'm right here. I can hear everything. I have seen. And it's a really surreal experience. Honestly, like, it's frustrating, but it's more, it's you literally feel invisible. Like, who do they think is talking to them when I'm explaining to them the medications they're going to get, the tests we're going to run? Like, who do they think in their mind? Like, that's what always runs through my head. Like, who do they think this is talking to them? Like, I'm it's always baffling, and I wish it wasn't still, you know, hurtful and surprising, but it makes you feel completely invisible. Like, you have to introduce yourself as a doctor 5 times where it registers. I am your doctor. I'm the person taking care of you. There's no white guy in a white coat coming behind me to validate what I'm saying. It's just me. Like, it's still very, very, it's a yucky feeling.
Well, it seems like that one cuts across race. I mean, really, it's purely gender. Doesn't matter the race of the female physician. It's just the fact that they're female.
I think
So I too had that experience, Tiffany,
Yeah.
and team. But mine was a little bit more serious. A man from CMS came to I was a research director. He came to my office and started asking me about a patient, you know, and this was in the 90s. And I remember being like, what are you asking me about? You know, and my chair was down the hall. And as we started to talk a little bit, it became very apparent to me, he was accusing me of Medicare fraud for not seeing the patient. And I went to my chair and talked to my chair, and my chair said, you know, we're not going to have this conversation. We're not saying anything more. But then as I looked at the chart and thought, why would the patient think that they weren't seen by a doctor? I was in there multiple times. Why did you think? And then it hit me, because I wasn't a man.
Right.
And then I was being accused of, you know, Medicare fraud based on that. And so it went a little bit deeper, and, you know, and obviously the hospital attorneys and everybody took care of that. But it, you know, the whole idea that, and like you, Tiffany, I was in there multiple times talking, addressing, we had a consultant come down, you know, and you still didn't get the picture.
Right.
You know, and there was a part of me that didn't know what to do or what to say.
And Michelle, has that happened to you more than once over the last 30 years?
Sure. And I always do, you know, and so I do think there's this kind of feeling like sometimes people can talk, the staff, you can call me Michelle. I don't mind being called Michelle. However, when we're in front of the patients, I'm Dr. Blanda, because the patients need to know that I'm Dr. Blanda, and that, you know, and you're Dr. Lopez. They need to know who we are. And, you know, we have since then gotten those backers on our badge that say MD or doctor, or, you know, to kind of say, here's my badge. I just want to remember I'm the doctor, you know, and so kind of going back in there and explaining to people who you are. I do think you'll find though, sometimes as your experience goes on, like I think now as I've gotten a lot more experience, people realize, hey, she's the chief doctor. She's like the doctor who's going to call the shots, you know, because you have more experience and it becomes very apparent to patients then.
I mean, it's the reason why I wear a white coat, you know, like I remember starting in residency, I'd wear my white coat, and I got thoroughly ridiculed, you know, by my ER, you know, colleagues, saying like, oh, here, you know, here comes the medicine resident, or like, you know, whoever, the consult. And it was really kind of embarrassing having to explain, like, no, if I wear a white coat, I don't get stopped by security. If I wear a white coat, nobody asks me who I am and if I can get them a bedpan. And you know what I mean? Like, this is kind of my way of validating, you know, to myself and everyone else that no, I belong here. Like I actually deserve to be here. I mean, and as an attending now, like I, you know, at a new place, like I definitely felt very, you know, uncomfortable until my white coat came in the mail, because I just didn't, you know, it's sad that you need that, but I definitely feel like I kind of need that extra layer of external, you know, that it sends that external message to the patients and to the people around me that I'm the doctor in charge.
Right. And Tiffany, I always wore my white coat, always.
Yeah.
And John, you bring up a good point. You know, the scenario is purposely chosen. It's not race. Clearly, it's gender. Although Tiffany, I'm hearing your story about wearing a white coat and being, not stopped or stopped by security. That clearly well, I shouldn't say clearly, but my guess is that race probably played a role in it. But yeah, the microaggressions happen for really, while the focus of this, what Ron Hall presented really focused on race, it happens in a lot of different areas. Gender is a while it to me, at least in my observation, it doesn't get the publicity that say race might, yet I think it's as pervasive as anything else. At least, again, that's my observation with what I see and what I deal with. So next, sir, I'm gonna call on you. I'm not. There's no test here. You're still gonna get through medical school and all that. I'm just curious. You're at the very beginning of your, very close to the beginning of your career. So I'm curious, when you hear this, or maybe you've witnessed this during medical school, what are your thoughts? How does it make you feel?
Funny you ask that because I was a teacher for about 6 years prior, and whenever I had these type of conversations and interactions, I used to tell my students' parents that this is the educator at hand. Don't come and address me, and I will back my fellow colleague. As a student, it was kind of hard because it just became weird that patients will address me as the physician. I say, I'm a student. She's the doctor. So I try to position myself like either in back of my attending, in the side of my attending, and eventually I just left the room and didn't even go in. And I kind of felt ashamed because it's like, I don't know if I am doing my part by standing away from my attending or if I'm making the case easier. So that's something I want to learn as I continue growing as a physician, because as an educator, it was like, I don't know what to say.
And how about you, John? I'll call you mid-career. I don't know if that makes you younger or older. What are your thoughts on this and how it might make you feel?
Yeah, I've definitely have, I'm not sure if I've witnessed it firsthand, but certainly, hearing the stories from my female colleagues, that it's, resident as well as other faculty, it's such a common occurrence. And I think for a long time, it's just sort of been, that's, that's the norm. But I think, and I think this, like the case vignette is a good example of, I think, just more attention gets focused on these issues, that, saying that that's not okay, and, what can we do in response to it, as opposed to just like kind of, laughing it off.
Yeah, Tiffany, I think of the energy that you have to expend. I have to wait for my white coat to come, because that will make life a little bit better. I have to go into the room 5 times to tell them I'm the doctor. So I don't have to do I don't think about white coat or not. I go in once. I don't have to expend that kind of energy. Yet for you probably have to do this every day.
I definitely think about it. Yeah, I think about it. I probably perseverate a bit too much on every aspect of my appearance before I go into work. It's definitely something that, I'm very, very cognizant of. So it's so normalized, and I know that I'm not alone in this, but it's very much, and the reason why I think race also factors in is because visually, who do I look most like? I look most like the techs, right? I look most like the nurses. I look most like everyone but an attending, because, and I think in a lot of folks, especially at Mount Sinai, the idea is I'm going to have a white male doctor, even though that's not really always the case. Like and we have a very diverse staff. But I think that there's always kind of that moment of like, oh, and sometimes it's actually for the positive. There have been a few times where, I'll have, Black patients and they'll be like, I need to speak to the doctor in charge. This is unacceptable. And they're furious. And they see me walk up and there's this moment of like, oh, I was expecting to yell at a white guy. Like I wasn't really expecting to talk to you. Like, and so there's a moment of, oh, okay. Someone who looks a little bit familiar, someone who I actually might be able to connect with. So it's not always a negative experience, but it frequently is.
They're going to pull us out, but just, everybody.
Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you guys had productive conversations in your breakout rooms. It is really cool to hear their perspectives of folks from honestly all over the country and like their experiences with microaggressions and how they address them. And we are going to talk about techniques for speaking up in our lecture right after this. But to recap like our small group, so in group 1 we discussed a microaggression about the folks who don't see color. I'm pretty sure you guys have all heard that. I don't see color, I only see the character of the person. And I think seeing the character of the person is really important, but we all see color the same as we see what you have on. We see what's in your background, and none of us are blind, like in terms of not being able to experience as much as we can take in. So I think that all of that affects how we perceive the world and how we perceive each other, right? So I think saying that we don't see something is not right. And that was part of what we discussed and how our own personal upbringing and backgrounds and socialization kind of make us feel the way that we feel. But the coolest part of our conversation is we did start turning it towards of how do you speak up? How do you address those things? Like when you're in the room with the learner, like how do you actually try to protect them to some degree, or at least let whoever it is who said this microaggression, like how do you let them know that that's wrong? We had some varying opinions on how you do that, but I know we're going to discuss it more in a later breakout session. But it was really awesome to hear everybody's thoughts and kind of where they're coming from. And we had a medical student in our group as well, so hearing Jake's opinion as a student and as one of our learners, I think was really important and helpful.
Well, so Cassie did like group 1, so I'll just summarize kind of like what we talked about in group 2. And so our microaggression was about someone who felt slighted, that, as a member of the majority group, that they felt slighted, that they did not get into medical school on the first try, as a result that somebody who was underrepresented in medicine took their slot and somehow was undeserving of that slot. The microaggression was the assumption that the underrepresented minority was somehow less qualified, maybe not as smart, and took a spot unfairly from that person. The conversation was really interesting because our group was trying to figure out, was this someone who really believed this? Was this someone who was just trying to blow off steam? And as to gaining further insight as to why they did not get into medical school the first couple of times during our process. And our group really was good at turning towards, just speaking up and trying to clarify exactly what your colleague meant when he made that statement, and to explore their thought processes, like, well, what did you mean when you said that? So kind of like speaking up and trying to get more information to clarify why they had those thoughts in their head. And then based on what they heard, our group decided that, well, you can kind of like educate them on what it would be like from a person of color or an underrepresented in medicine's perspective. So for example, if you had difficulties with taking tests, maybe resources and things of that nature, which impacted your ability to get into medical school, then you can talk about for people who are underrepresented in medicine, that can be, whatever those concerns were, whatever those obstacles were, that actually gets multiplied by several factors and makes it even more difficult for them. So they're also facing the same difficulties as they are, but on a larger level. So those are pretty much some of the take-home points from our group when we discussed our microaggression.
Great, and in my breakout room, or our breakout room, we talked about a scenario where a male patient was complaining that he hadn't been seen in the emergency department for a couple of hours. He was going to complain, and it turns out that he had been seen by the all-female team, medical student, resident, and attending physician. So again, some of it was illustrating that, oh, this is not just about race. This is about many, many different aspects. Gender is certainly a very important aspect. So we talked about really the experiences. We had a young and an older female attendings who really shared with us some of their experiences. For the men that were in this, we shared our thoughts and feelings as to what this may mean, what experiences we have had. And really, we didn't get into, should we speak up? What do we do? But we talked about really the energy that is spent by somebody who is the victim of this kind of microaggression, the steps that need to be taken to really reinforce that, yes, I am the doctor here. How many times you have to tell somebody the things you have to think about, just the energy that is required in trying to combat microaggressions.
That I'm on mute. Before we, that's gonna be my coffee cup. Sorry, I'm on mute. Before we move on to Dr. Lopez's session about techniques for speaking up, are there any other comments from the group that anyone would like to make?
Although we haven't had somebody say you're on mute yet. That's the most commonly uttered phrase from 2020 onward.
I just haven't been saying it out loud.
I recognize my computer says it to me, you're on mute. All right, so we're going to turn this session over to Dr. Lopez.
All right, well, great. Great. All right, so we've had, let me get this right. All right, so we've had a session, talking about the experiences of a microaggression. So when you think about microaggressions, each one of us has experienced a microaggression. We've witnessed a microaggression, and we've certainly caused a microaggression. And it's happened, it probably happens, we say, either not infrequently or actually quite frequently, depending on your point of view. So we've talked a little bit about, what is a microaggression. I'm just going to review a little bit, but really what I want to spend this portion of the session is actually giving you techniques. When you see one, when you are the victim of, or you cause one, what do you actually do to fight against microaggression? So my talk is titled, Dealing with Microaggressions, Speaking Up, an Inclusive Life Skill. So just as, I don't know, sometimes it's hard for me to convince people, but the same, ultrasound technique, ED thoracotomy. Those are all skills that we've had to learn to practice emergency medicine. Well, here's another skill. This is a much more subtle skill. Some people may not view it in the same way, yet unconscious bias, implicit bias, microaggressions really affect our daily interactions, our every human interaction. They affect the decisions that we make. And think of the thousands of interactions that you have, the thousands of decisions that you make on any given day. As emergency physicians, we do this all the time. All right. So Ron did a really good job, I think, with getting us on the same page with regards to definitions. There's some things I'm gonna either give you a little bit different view. Mostly what I want to do is I want to reinforce this topic of microaggressions. All right, because sometimes you hear the word micro or the prefix micro, and it makes it sound like not that big a deal. It's subtle, nobody meant anything by it. So it's really not as big a deal as we might be making it out to be. Well, there's the second half of that word, aggression. So here are a couple definitions of aggression. So micro, small, but aggressions is part of it. And you look at these, this is Merriam-Webster definition: forceful action, making attacks, hostile, injurious, or destructive behavior. So I really just want to drive home the fact that while micro is in it, while they're not as big, they're not as pronounced, they are aggressions and can be viewed as hostile. They can cause injury, maybe not on such a big scale, but they do cause injury and they can be destructive in the actual outcomes. Dr. Daryl Wing-Sue. All right, so this is, probably the world's expert on the topic of microaggressions. He has many publications, and actually what I'll do is make sure that all of you, I want to share with you a publication on how you actually deal with microaggressions. But here is his, and I think one of the best definitions of microaggression. They are everyday verbal, nonverbal, or environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentional or unintentional. Now, they're often unintentional, and they communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target persons based solely upon their marginalized group membership. So really, typically what happens in a microaggression is that the group, if you are in a group that's not in power, if you are in a group that is not in the majority, and this is, it's not just race, it's everything. Sometimes it's emergency physicians versus internists, but you think about that, if you're in a group that's not in power, a group that's not in the majority, you are often more likely to be the target of a microaggression. And then further definition by Dr. Daryl Wing-Sue, it invalidates your identity and your experience. And that's what makes microaggressions so hurtful, is they are typically invalidating. It invalidates somebody's identity, right? And again, I want to drive this home. On an everyday basis, we experience these things, but I want to drive home that vulnerable, marginalized, historically traumatized populations. So you think about your identity, you think about the identities of the people that you work with, and these are, if you are in these groups, you are often the victim of microaggression. And there's often a power dynamics that's involved as well. And again, we typically think of microaggressions from a race and racism, but it's really any marginalized group in our society. People of color, women, LGBTQ, disability. So your groups that are often in the minority or not empowering. And this is from Dr. Wing Su as well. Does it happen in emergency medicine? Well, I heard about it in my breakout room. Maybe you had talked about it in your breakout room. And, you know, I have hundreds of these articles that we can find regarding bias, unconscious bias, microaggressions. Here's one from Annals of Emergency Medicine from 2020. All right, so just last year, it's not like we've gotten really good at this and it's less. We keep finding the same articles that we've been seeing perhaps 10, 20, even 30 years ago. So it exists in us. All right, you hear this, you're very articulate. You don't look gay. You were pretty good at that considering the hand that you were dealt. You speak well for an Asian. 3, whoever walked into a bar. These are just a number, a few examples of a microaggression that has happened or a microaggression that is about to happen. Right, so what do you do when you see this? What do you do when you hear it? What do you do if you are the victim of this? It's directed at you. Our medical students, I teach our unconscious bias, microaggressions to our medical students, and our students complain, we know so much about the topic, but you got to tell us what you do and how to do it, how to actually put this into action. So here's what we'll do. Here's your common reaction. Our most common reaction is that we don't do anything. You know, you hear it. I'm not sure. Was that a microaggression? Maybe I really interpreted that the wrong way. Maybe it's really not a microaggression. Maybe it's just me in the way that I heard it. Maybe I heard it wrong. You know, if I speak up, that's going to stop the conversation. People are going to be looking at me. I don't really want to cause any trouble. This might make things worse. So the most common reaction that one has, all of us have, is to say nothing and be quiet. It's often too uncomfortable for us to actually say or do something about it. So you're thinking, well, you know, I really should say something. I think that was a microaggression. And, you know, if I don't say anything, it's just going to go by. Yeah, but if I do say something, all of these things can happen. So you've got this push and pull. Hopefully you've got this push and pull of should I or shouldn't I? And you're trying to figure out, well, what is it that I actually do? So when you stay silent, I want you to remember this term, silent collusion. So that means by remaining silent, you actually agree to what was said. You are in favor of, you back that, you agreeing, you are approving of that. By staying silent, silent collusion, you're actually saying, yeah, that was okay. I'm good with that. And that just further drives home, it further drives the outcome, the negative outcome. So somebody's already feeling bad about what happened, typically the target. When everybody agrees to it through silence, typically then what happens is they're feeling even worse because they're thinking, yeah, everybody else thinks the same thing. So silent collusion. All right, so what do you do now? Right? We're going to talk about what you actually do. Well, what you really want to do is you want to interrupt the unconscious action. So think about the scenarios that you're in. These things happen. They're all happening so quickly. They're happening largely unconsciously. What you're really looking to do is you're looking to interrupt that flow of action. You're trying to make the unconscious conscious. You want to be an ally. Ron talked about what an ally is. An ally is somebody who will speak up on behalf of that person. Really what you're doing is you're not only speaking up for that individual, but you're really speaking up on behalf of respect for each other. So this is a good thing to do. It's a noble cause. It helps an individual, but it really is helping out all of humanity. So I'll bring it to that bigger level. All right, what I want to do is I'm going to play a little video. This is a module that we use at Jefferson. So we modules, this is required of all employees, our 35,000 plus enterprise employees. All of our, almost 8,000 students in our organization have access to this. And we actually use this to teach microaggressions to our students. Let's see if I can do this.
So how do you speak up against stereotypes and demeaning comments without putting somebody down? Well, there are lots of ways you can speak up, and we'll practice several of them. It's all in how you approach it. The key is to assume good intent. And that's our first technique for speaking up. Assume good intent and explain impact.
I know you mean well, but that hurts.
The important thing is to assume good intent. Approach the other person as if that person is a decent human being. When you assume the best, there's no need to blame, shame, or insult the person who just said something biased or demeaning. There are two parts to the technique. First, acknowledge the other person's positive intentions. Then describe the negative results of the statement or behavior. When you encounter stereotypes or other unfair depictions of people, ask a question. Choose a simple, non-blaming question such as, "What do you mean?" Or, "I'm sorry, what was that?"
What do you mean?
You can even practice these simple questions in advance. Remember, the key is to assume good intent, approaching the conversation as if the other person meant no harm. Questions are great because they're so easy to use and they open up conversation in a non-blaming way. Sincere and open-ended questions that avoid blaming the other person work best. And tone of voice is everything. Questions that are sarcastic or accuse the other person are not helpful. Interrupting and redirecting changes the direction of the conversation abruptly without requiring further discussion.
Whoa, let's not go down that path.
Interrupting and redirecting is simple, and it gives people a chance to change directions. If the disrespectful behavior continues, you can use one of the other techniques, such as assuming good intent and explaining impact. Or you can walk away, removing yourself from the situation. But the important thing is to not stay silent. Sometimes people attribute a common human behavior to only one group, and then they stereotype the whole group as if everyone in the group is identical. In this situation, you can broaden the description to humankind in general. That helps break through the stereotyping.
I don't think it's a gay thing. I think that applies to everyone.
This technique is powerful. You can show the attribute isn't just about the stereotype group by suggesting that the trait is universal human behavior. So, you can break through stereotypes by showing how the so-called trait of the stereotype group really applies to many different people. Or you can use an opposite technique to break through the stereotypes. Instead of broadening to human nature, you can narrow the focus down to one individual. Often people are clumped together in a stereotype. This approach, make it individual, breaks through that clumping. While the characteristic may be true of a few individuals, it's definitely not true of everyone in a group.
You mean all managers, or are you speaking of someone in particular?
Sometimes you don't have the energy, or you're too stunned to say something, or just can't think of what to say. Well, here's something easy that anyone can say. Ouch.
Ouch.
What do you say when someone unintentionally steps on your toe? Same thing here. Ouch communicates a lot with little effort. It says, your words had a negative impact on me or on others that I care about. If you have the time and the energy, you can ouch and educate. Explain how the words affected you or others. Or you can simply say, ouch. It's a simple, effective, acceptable four-letter word that carries a lot of meaning. And it puts a pause in the conversation, which gives everyone time to think about what is being said. Assume good intent and explain impact. Ask a question. Interrupt and redirect. Broaden to universal human behavior. Make it individual. say ouch. So, we've seen several ways for responding to stereotypes and other demeaning comments. You can use these techniques one-on-one or within a group, in public or in private, at work or at home. You can use any one at any time. You can even come back later and address something that was said earlier. Well, did you learn new ways to speak up when you engage?
All right. So I know that was fairly quick. You know, in 5 minutes, they squeezed in what are the techniques. I'll tell you, I've seen this many a time. Each time I look at it, I remember a little bit more. But these are I don't know what I've seen, one of the best ways to really fight against microaggressions and ways to speak up. So let me just review, right? Because review, you have to see this many times. This is extremely important, assuming good intent. If you do this, you lessen the chance for the person who committed the microaggression. You lessen the chance of defensiveness. When you become defensive, think about it. You tend to shut down. You focus on yourself. I feel bad. You don't think about things the way you might best think about things. So if you assume good intent and you actually verbalize that, it actually gives you the chance, it gives that person a chance to open up and be receptive to certain comments. So you're not looking to blame or shame, all right? Stay away from that so that you don't shut somebody down. I know you meant that as a joke, or you probably didn't mean it in a certain way, but that is, then you explain what the actual impact is. Ask a question. What did you mean by that? So you're interrupting that train of action. You're getting people to think about that. You're having conversation with somebody to further clarify, because perhaps you did take it to mean it in one way when it really wasn't, but you're engaging that person in conversation and getting clarity. Interrupt and redirect. Sometimes you can't think that quickly. You know, what question do I ask? But you're simply stopping that train of action. Whoa, let's not go there. You're interrupting and redirecting. Broaden it to universal behavior. So with microaggressions, they tend to be based upon generalizations of a particular group. What you're trying to do is you're trying to make it individual. Or you know, remove that. I don't think it's just that person. It really is all humans. It's not that. It's not just in that group. And I'm sorry, I got mixed. Make it individual. So you really want to focus on the situation at hand, the person at hand, rather than an entire group. You make it individual because really, that is what we do. It's that individual, and an individual is typically not representative of an entire group. And then simply say, ouch. Non-judgmental, it's calling attention to something that happened. It stops that train of action and it pauses the conversation and it allows some time to think. You know, it's nice if you can do this all at once in the same encounter. Sometimes it doesn't happen that way. Sometimes you say, you know, I've been thinking about this and I want to go back to it, but it just simply allows time to think about what happened. It allows time for some conscious action. You have to be careful. So it's easy to say, well, this is what you do. You have to understand where you are. If there's a hierarchy, it's not that easy. So when I talk to our medical students, if I talk to you as a resident, a young attending, you know, there's power dynamics that are involved. There's hierarchy. You have to be aware of that. It's really difficult to call somebody out if there's a big power differential. That doesn't mean you don't do it, but you have to be careful about how you do it. And sometimes you might need to enlist somebody else to help, somebody that's outside of you, somebody that's higher up in that power differential. Sometimes you have to enlist other people So you're not letting it go, you're just getting help in order to make that happen. All right, what do you do if you were the microaggressor? Again, we all do this. So this is just simply us being human beings. Remember, the intent is not there, but sometimes we say things or we do something that we just really weren't aware of. That's why it's a microaggression. You know, it's unintentional. We're unaware of it, yet we do this. I can speak for me. I do this. I think I'm more aware of this, and I maybe do it a little bit less, but that doesn't mean I don't do it at all. I'm a microaggressor. We all have committed it. So what do you do if in the case that you're not the witness, you're not the victim, but you're actually the person who caused the microaggression? All right, so our director of diversity and inclusion education in our organization, he and a group of other people came up with a technique. So what do you do if you're the microaggressor? You do CPR. All right, now, what does CPR stand for? All right, well, C is calm yourself. All right, you commit it, you either realize it, or more likely, you get called out on it. So what's our natural response? I didn't mean it. You get defensive. You start thinking about all these different things. Well, the first step, if you're the microaggressor, is calm yourself. C for calm. Take a deep breath, collect your thoughts, calm down. You want that surge of epinephrine to kind of quiet down. One of the things you want to do is resist defending yourself. So this is bringing your consciousness into that train of action. All right, P, practice humility. All right, so take responsibility for your actions. Okay, you did it. Again, the intent may not have been there, but you did something that caused somebody to feel harmed. All right. So what you do when you practice humility is you think about the other person. Rather than thinking about me and how I feel, how am I going to defend myself, what are people going to think? Think about the other person who felt harmed by whatever happened. Elevate their harm. Be more concerned about them than about yourself. And then R is repair, right? So it's not about you, not about your feelings, not about your reputation. It's really about the relationship between you and that particular person. What can I do? All right, that's, you know, you're trying to repair it. Understand that often, very commonly, it's not you say something and it's repaired right then and there. Right? That's often not how it happens. A lot of times it could be action of what you do, you know, what happens moving down the line. So are you actually showing the action that you're actually going to be better and not commit that same microaggression? So CPR, you have to practice these things, recognize that the repair can take longer than just that moment. All right, don't do these things. You will make it worse if you say these things like, you're just being sensitive. I didn't mean it like that, so you shouldn't be offended. I was just kidding. It's not a big deal. What you're doing if you were to make responses like this, you are further, you're making it worse. You're just simply not recognizing that person's identity. Look, you've probably already done something to lessen their identity. You're simply doing that more if you say these sorts of things. You would actually be better off saying nothing than saying these, because you will just make it worse. That person will feel even worse, and it will just keep going. You get this, you know, this never-ending cycle. All right, CPR. This takes practice. It takes preparation. All right, so just like everything else that we do, you read, you become educated, we're in simulation, you practice these sorts of things. You want to have these responses rehearsed in your head. So when it happens to you, you witness it, you're the one who causes the microaggression. You actually need to be knowledgeable and be prepared for this. You need to practice it. You need to use the steps to speak up. So now that you've been to this session here, you know you got to speak up in some way. You got to figure out what's the best way to speak up, using these steps, gaining an ally, using leadership. It's really important that you speak up. All right, so with that, again, I'll have these materials available to you because you came here today. This is something that it just takes time and practice. It doesn't happen by showing up and listening to this 30 minutes. It doesn't happen if you listen to it one more time. This is something that's an ongoing process that you can get better at. All right, so with that, I guess first, are there any questions that anybody has for what I presented? I realize it was pretty quick with a lot of action items. Any questions that anybody has? All right. Well, so Cassie and Ron, I get we'll go into a 15-minute break and resume at wherever you are at 1:45. So I guess it's about 17 minutes. We'll resume and at 1:45.
Yes,
See you
you're
guys
correct.
then. Caffeinate, go to the bathroom. See you in a few, folks. Think everybody has made their way back looking at the numbers. So welcome back everybody to our big group. I'm hoping that everybody's group had conversations that they felt were helpful in applying some of the things that we've talked about today to their own institutions and what they, how they're going to apply some of these techniques and some of the information to their own programs and departments. I think the other thing is thinking about how you want to share information with other people. So I think one of the best things about coming to national conferences is not just the education for ourselves, but how we can share that education with other people, because we all know that to make change takes a team. Like if you don't get buy-in from everybody else, you're not going to make very much progress, right? So like we're going to need buy-in from everybody. So how to share that information with other people and how to apply it so that we can all have a better experience in academic medicine and maybe build a structure that the folks who come after us will have. Let's all be real, they're all going to have problems, but different problems than the ones we have now. So Right. So I was supposed to regroup my small group. My bad. So our small group talked a lot about kind of the current status of our institutions, and we gave a lot of thought to who is actually carrying the DEI load for our institutions and our departments, and what does that labor look like? Is someone compensated for that labor? Is it someone who was just inadvertently tasked with that, or is it someone who really is interested in doing that? Is it more of like how the Dr. Aseo Asari's paper was talking about, like Black people fixing the Black people problems, or is it folks standing up for DEI principles, and how do we support those people? Or is it just like unpaid labor and to some degree a form of tokenism? So how can we work to help those who are driving the efforts? And as some of us are not in large leadership positions at our institutions, and so how can we also kind of push for diversity and inclusion and in academic medicine? We also talked about like the importance of kind of institutional support, not only monetarily, but like this year we've seen institutions and programs speak out about like their stance on like diversity inclusion. There's been diversity statements in a lot of places, the people speaking out about the Derek Chauvin trial, people speaking out about what has happened in terms of police brutality, and kind of how some places silence kind of felt like that they were complicit with this. And so like that goes back to Bernie's conversation about like silent collusion. And so like how do we work together to kind of combat that? I think those were our big take home points.
So a little bit about group two's take home points. Some of them are very similar to what Dr. Bradby discussed, and that was who's doing the diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So it seems like the load of that still is falling on underrepresented people in medicine, and trying to get other people involved into the DEI work so that they don't end up paying the minority tax. One of the other things that came up was just discussing like the systemic or maybe idea of institutionalized like racism in some of our recruitment policies, or even some of our school curriculum. So we kind of talked about what happened with Princess Dinner, and how, you know, how she was forced to rank historically Black colleges and university students lower on the rank list, and why that was occurring. Was it related to like the US News World and World Report, which ranked medical schools not on the quality of their medical education, but ranked them on their endowments or their NIH grant funding and things of that nature? And is that what's giving them an unfair advantage in the ranking process and disadvantaging those students who attended historically Black colleges and universities? And so one of the things that we discussed was like, maybe we should look at how do we recruit people to our academic programs. Are you familiar with what your rank list looks like? Are you familiar with your rubric scoring system? And does your rubric scoring system put those at certain schools at a disadvantage? So you actually have to go back and you have to do the work and make sure that you don't have anything that inadvertently like slipped into your ranking system. And all of this was, we always hear about the pipeline, right? Is the pipeline leaky, or we don't have an adequate pipeline? And though this conversation can be difficult because there are many factors that can affect your pipeline, one of them is making sure that we're not breaking the pipeline, like we're putting roadblocks or obstacles in the way so that the pipeline does become leaky, and that you do lose doctors or students to the pipeline. Monetary support is another thing that came up as well. I'm not going to talk about that too much. And then, diversity recruits diversity. If your program, if your faculty, if your institution is diverse, then it's going to continue to recruit diversity. And that is at all levels. if it's in a medical school, your student body, your residents, your fellowship, your GME leadership, your UME leadership, you should be able to, recruit diversity rather easily. And then the last thing that we talked about is it's constant work. This is not something that you just do at one time and it's all better. There are going to be new issues, there are going to be new problems that come up. And you're going to be constantly working at getting better, constantly working at improving the diversity, and constantly working to get better at your institution. So those are some of the take-home points from Group 2. Go Bernie for Group 3.
All right. And Group 3, look, I'm not sure, kind of to tag along with that, we just really discussed how at our big institutions, how despite, efforts, that not a whole lot has changed. Within individual departments, some have done a good job, but overall, when you look at bigger groupings like medical schools and universities, a lot has not changed, especially at the faculty level. And then just talked a little bit about the structures that are in place that serve as barriers, as well as the individual biases, to tie into what it is that we're talking about here. So clearly a big challenge, and I think there's a desire to do it, but when you look at the history, we've not done a great job overall, and we have a responsibility to do so.
Good. That being said, why don't we take a 15-minute break? Does that sound good for everyone? So it's wherever you're at. If you're on the East Coast, it's 1:10. If you're Central, it's 10:10. West Coast, I think 12:10.
It's 10 after the hour.
I went to West. I automatically start thinking about the West Coast.
Yeah.
But it's potty break time, and then get some more water, and then we will reconvene in 15 minutes.
All right, good. We picked up a few new people here.
It has been many years since I've been accused of being anything new.
I don't know, does that make you feel better today if I called you new at something?
I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm sort of in the same boat as you, so. All right, so let's see.
Hey, Bernie, before you get started,
yes,
the one thing that when you talked about stepping in, you talked about, kind of doing it in real time, but how about if you didn't do it in real time? Then how do you come back to someone, or maybe we can role play that, or, of coming back later and saying, hey, I kind of thought about that, because you were talking about how making it unconscious to conscious. So if you could touch on that.
Yeah, it's actually, I think it's just what you said. It is, you're taken in the moment. And what's the most common reaction? We don't say anything, whether it's the victim, the bystander. That is very common. And we're socialized in that way. Well, don't make waves, don't create confrontation. I don't like confrontation. That's the norm. The norm is to just kind of keep moving. So somebody says something at a meeting, the meeting goes on, it finishes, and it's like nothing happened. Yeah, it's ideally you would speak up in the moment, or somebody would speak up in the moment. You take care of it right then and there, and it's over and done with, and you've started the process. That's the ideal situation. It doesn't happen that frequently. So what do? You know, I wanted to talk with you about this, or, yesterday you said something at this meeting, and after I've had a chance to think about it, this is what I think happened. I know you didn't mean it. I know you didn't mean, you meant that as a joke, but I think that hurt so-and-so. That you probably aren't going to do the ouch or, interrupt and redirect, because it's happened already, time has passed, but you can certainly do the, assume good intent and explain impact. Often what happens in some cases, actually in a lot of cases, it's easier because you've removed a lot of the emotional component of it, or it's certainly less charged. Whereas in the heat of the moment, everybody's limbic system is active, and you can't think straight, and you've got emotion that's playing. And when you go back to it at a later time, you've removed some of that. You can use your cerebral cortex a little bit more. So that's essentially how you might do that.
Thank you.
What if you're the microaggressor and you realize it at a later time? Is it an apology? Hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I'm sure it came off wrong. I apologize. I'm assuming that's the reasonable way to go.
It's again, the idea is you speak up, okay? And there's an ideal time, but sometimes it just depends. Maybe the ideal time's not in the moment. It just depends on it. Like if you're at a board of trustees meeting and you're presenting on behalf of the emergency department, that's probably not a great time to just speak up in the moment.
I meant later on.
Yeah.
If you realize, oh my God, I did this yesterday, what do I do? Yeah.
Yeah, it's better to still speak up, because what you're doing is you're addressing the individual, you're acknowledging their hurt, whatever that may be. You are attempting to repair the relationship. So I think in that CPR, it was that's what they call a reparative model. The intent being you're trying to right a wrong. You try not to say, I didn't mean it that way, even though you probably didn't mean it a certain way. But yeah, it's still better, because then you make the relationship very personal. You acknowledge what happened. You show the person that your intent is to repair. And then what you've done is you've furthered that relationship along. Right, but yeah, it's speaking up, and it's very difficult to do. I don't know, I'm curious. So, the scenario that we had, Phil, Ava, Michelle, you missed out. Our scenario was we had a patient who complained that they hadn't been seen in the emergency department. They're going to file a complaint, haven't seen a doctor. Turns out, well, they've been seen for the last they had been seen over that time by an all-female team of medical student, resident, and faculty member. Probably a relatively, well, I'm going to guess it's probably in some ways something that you've experienced on a regular basis, or Phil, maybe you've witnessed that over time. But that was our scenario in that. And, we talked about how difficult that might be. So let's, all right, we're going to try this as a simulation. I've been waiting here for the last 2 hours. I haven't seen a doctor. And you know what? I've done this press gainy thing before, and I'm going to give you really low marks, and I'm going to talk to hospital administration and report you for not getting me seen by a doctor. All right, so what are you going to do? Now you find out who the doctors were, the medical student. What would you do?
Well, I know for me, I usually, if I hear that, the first thing I go in and say, Mr. Lopez, it's me, Dr. Blanda. I am the doctor who's caring for you. And if you didn't, if I didn't make that clear, I apologize. But I'm the doctor. Was there something that you didn't tell me that you need to tell me, or is of concern that we're not addressing? You know, and I kind of try to repair the bridge and take the responsibility that maybe they didn't understand.
Okay.
I think as a male attending, if I hear that, and that scenario then would be a female resident and or student rather than a female attending, since it's me. And, you know, I've gone in and said, you know, Dr. Smith is your doctor. She's been here multiple times. Don't you, you know, same kind of answer, but, and I'm also here to help out. I'm the supervisor, you know.
Well, Michelle, I like your approach of sort of, and I guess this goes to, you know, that idea of assuming good intent. It's like, you know, it's kind of our, you know, we're sorry for not making it clear to you who the, you know, that she was the physician.
Okay.
Question.
Yes.
Would it be inappropriate or unprofessional to just get the gist of what they envision a doctor looks like?
So what next? Or what would tell me what you'd be getting at? What would you say? What would you do?
A couple of times I did tell the individuals, okay, my senior physician came in, my resident came in. They're the ones who are in charge, but let me ask you, in your mind, what do you expect a doctor would look like if you're saying that you have not been seen by a doctor, when in fact you had two well-capable individuals that are physicians with higher learning and higher ranking than me, and that's me putting myself in like the medical student and using the hat of I'm a medical student, so don't get mad at me type of approach.
Well, I think that is an interesting thing, and at the same time, you have to watch that some patients may take offense, you know. But I do think that it always reminds me of, I remember one time someone said, you know, my religion, and they said, oh, I didn't know you were that religion, you know, and it was kind of like, well, how would you know by looking at me? You know what I mean? It was just kind of awkward. You know, it was like, I don't think people's religion comes out just in their looks. You know, it was just awkward. So you don't want to make the patient feel awkward. And at the same time, I think that happens a lot when you're with a female doctor and a male nurse, where the patient keeps addressing the nurse while you're answering the questions, and they keep telling the nurse. And a lot of our nurses will say, hey, that's the doctor. You know, you need to be talking to her, not to me, and kind of correct that. But I think that's interesting, because I think some patients would say, gosh, you're right. You know, maybe I have a little bit more insight now.
Yeah, next, sir. So your technique is, you know, ask a question. You're interrupting that flow of action. You're trying to get a little bit more information. You're trying to gain an understanding. So I think that's the technique. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I like the technique. It's just, I have mixed feelings. Would you actually say that to a patient? I'm not sure that I would say that. You know, the easy thing is they are all physicians, and that is a female medical student. That's fairly straightforward. You can leave it at that. It's a different relationship with doctor and patient. So All right, let me try something. Ava, so I'm going to pretend, because I'm not Deb, but I'm going to pretend. So I'm your chair, and we're looking at duties and a job that's coming up. So Ava, there's this position that we have that's coming open. I think you'd probably be pretty good for it, but I'm just a little bit concerned that, with your kids, that you might not be able to spend the time that I think you need to spend on doing a job like this. I don't know, do you take that as a microaggression in the first place?
Oh, so yeah, that's tough, Bernie, because I'm trying to think exactly how I would respond, but definitely because, if the position is open and you think I'm qualified, then you should offer me the position and let me decide if I can handle what's going on at home, et cetera. So I'm glad you're actually concerned about my personal family life and my well-being, but I feel like you should offer me the position, say I'm qualified, and you would love to have me in that position, and then let me figure out if I can handle the things that I have going on. So I guess my response could be, I think this is an exceptional position. I would be honored to take this role. It's something that I think I have the skill and talent to pursue. And I'd leave it at that. I wouldn't mention the kids, et cetera.
Okay, so you assumed good intent on my part, yet you said, you know what, let me figure that out. And you're kind of, I don't know, you're massaging my ego. You're saying, I'm glad you're really thinking of me, but you should let me decide that sort of thing.
No, I agree, because I feel like if it were my male colleague, no one would say that if they were in the room. They would offer them the position. They would say, I think you do great at this. Would you take it? And that would be all in the conversation.
Yeah, and that's how I feel. So for me, I would respond that, hey, it looks like a great position. I'd love to consider it. And I'm not going to even go there with you on the whole family. I'm just not going to engage in it.
Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. In retrospect, right? Think of now that we're trying to think about techniques and how you might use it. Think of a microaggression that you have experienced. Okay, and what microaggression have you experienced in which you were quiet? You didn't say anything about it. All right, so. Would somebody share one?
I'll share one, Bernie. I mean, I think similar to the situation you proposed, it's, when I was more junior and probably just having my kids, it was really hard for me to feel empowered to say something positive like Ava did. Like, thank you for considering this for, this position for me, because I think it was really hard not to be offended. And knowing that if I was a junior male faculty with young kids, it would be a very different approach and conversation. And I think one of the things I've learned over time is that it's really hard to have a good response in the moment, right? And we talk a lot about with our trainees and students and our faculty, frankly, you have to kind of think about these things ahead of time so that you can maybe have a little bit more eloquent response when you need it. So, I mean, the thing too about the all-female team, I saw somebody yesterday, who was like, no, I didn't see a doctor. Well, actually you did. You saw me like 3 different times. Oh, I didn't realize you're the doctor. Well, okay, I'm sorry, it wasn't clear. I did write my name on your whiteboard here, but I'm sorry we had a miscommunication. But there are days, to be frank, where like, I don't have the energy to do that. Like, I'm tired of it, I mean, I'm not that young anymore. So, it gets old. And I think for me too, learning to have like a little bit of mindfulness about it, take a step back, take a deep breath, and, you know, try to salvage that patient physician relationship, or if it's a relationship between myself and a senior faculty member, to hope that it came from a place of good, of well-intended meanings, but to also point out that, you know, it still was probably not the most appropriate way to offer, ask, or try to entice me to do something.
All right, so what would you do now when you stayed quiet? All right, so you mentioned something, you know, how Ava handled it. Would you now handle it differently, having heard some of the techniques? I heard you say you got to practice. You have to have almost a response in hand. Otherwise, sometimes it's just too hard to think and act in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think now, you know, sort of my typical response to things is thank you so much for considering me. Like, I'm truly honored by that. I'm going to take my time to think about if I can fully commit myself to this endeavor. And I don't ever mention my family or my other commitments in life, and leave it sort of on the vague end. But I will say, like, we were just talking about this actually with a male faculty who's about to have a second child this summer, and he applied for a position, and somebody was like, oh, but do you think it's going to be too much? And I said, that's his choice, not ours. Like, we don't put any judgment on that. If he's the most qualified person for this position, we are going to offer it to him, and it is his decision if he has the bandwidth to do it or not. Like, we can't let that influence our, you know, our decision about who is best suited for the position.
And that might be the answer, is to say, I would be happy to consider the position, and just like everyone, I will have to consider all the options and things going on in my life as I make that decision, because that's not unique to me or to you, it's unique to everyone.
If you're the victim of a microaggression, have you ever sought out an ally? Somebody you can talk to, somebody that might, you know, say, assist in the situation?
I mean, I'm kind of lucky. My office buddy is a mid-career Black man, and we are each other's allies almost all the time because we experience different microaggressions, but we both experience them almost every day. And, you know, he's my sounding board on a lot of things. And I think the same is true for him, because we see it from a little bit different perspective. And it's nice to have a safe space and a safe person to talk to about it. And on those days, to be like, I just didn't care. I walked away from the patient and was like, I'm sorry, I don't know what else to explain to you, but you were seen by the doctor. You know, and to have somebody say, like, I get it, at the end of a long day, a long string of shifts, like, was it the best response? Probably not, but it's okay. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be angry about it. And it's okay not to feel like you have to build the bridge yourself to fix the issue.
Yeah, I think having an ally, again, going as far as speaking up for, you know, intervening in some way, taking one of those steps, it's always good to have that. You know, sometimes, Michelle, I'm feeling your pain here. And I think, yeah, sometimes you just can't do it yourself, or sometimes, like you said, it's just too tiring to do it yourself, and you just say, I give up. But believe me, I hear that in our faculty as well. I hear similar sorts of things. So sometimes it's good to have an ally.
Yeah, I mean, and I will say I feel like we've been working so hard on the culture, and we do walk rounds at shift change. You know, every once in a while there'll be a patient screaming at one of the female residents like, hey nurse, and it's like so empowering when one of the male residents or a male attending is like, well, actually, that's Dr. Jones, and she's been taking care of you today. We're making our rounds, but she'll come back with you after that. And like, it's just like such a win, in my opinion, that, you know, and I know it means a lot to the resident who was subjected to microaggression too, to have colleagues, you know, back her up. So.
Yeah, so I think that shows the power of speaking up. If you're not, if you're not the one that's the victim of, I think there's a lot of power in speaking up on behalf. Some of it is you have to recognize that a microaggression has happened. I miss these all the time. I tell our faculty, listen, if I miss something, you are free to call me out on it, meaning he said this, she said that, or you said that, because sometimes I just don't recognize it because it's not what I see. But there's a lot of power in having those allies that can step up for you. If anything, you get support, makes you feel like you're not in it alone. So I think they're going to call us back in any second now. Just it takes a lot of practice and forethought. You really have to plan this out. I was in a training session. I said, I got this. I'm going to be good at this. And I was terrible at it because it caught me. We practiced sessions. They caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say. And having it prepared, like even the ouch, if you can use something like that, or hey, let's not go there. Those are just quick things that you can think of using, but it takes practice, and you kind of have to plan this out. So, all right, I'll see you on the other side.
Okay.
Maybe we lost our medical student.
Yes, we did have some people come in and out, so we did leave a few people, lose a few people.
Okay. So actually, here's what I'm kind of curious. Cassie had that presentation. What I'm curious about at your institution, or whatever it is, where you work. What are the bias issues? We're talking. We've talked about race, racism, bias, microaggressions. I think we've talked about how it's not only race; it's really many different things. But I'm just kind of curious. I'm curious. What are you experiencing where you are? What's the hot topic? What's the discussion? I'm just kind of curious what's happening where you are. Something we can discuss and talk about.
Well, I can tell you that I'm at Stanford, and we are not known for our diversity in the faculty right now, and it's been a problem for decades. We have tried hard to move the needle, and it's not moving very much. So our problem has been faculty recruitment and retention of UIM faculty. We have, I'm in the faculty senate for the School of Medicine, and we've been very involved with trying to push the School of Medicine into some more, taking them to task over this. And to their credit, they've put together a commission of some sort that is going to make recommendations of some sort to the School of Medicine and the hospitals on how to deal with this. And we're all sitting there waiting for results, and we're pushing and pushing and pushing, but it's been very, very slow. We've increased raw numbers of UIM faculty, but not greater than the proportion of general faculty being hired, or other, if you look at all the faculty. So the percentages are staying roughly the same within the entire faculty. So our problem has been just difficulty in recruitment and retention.
Is that medical school? Is that the entire university? Is it both?
It's the entire university. Palo Alto is Palo Alto, or as it's known by some of us, Shallow Alto. It's a great place in many ways, but it has lacked diversity, and we've lacked the ability to change that very much. And we're working, I think the current university president, the current dean are both committed, but we're waiting to see results. And I've been there over 3 decades, and we haven't, again, moved the needle very much. Now in emergency medicine, lately, we have a new chair. We just became a department 4 years ago or 5 years ago now, and we have a new chair, and she's made a lot of changes to the way we recruit, and we've done a pretty good job in the last 2 years, but it's a long time coming. And the rest of the departments in the School of Medicine are, some are good, some are not. So it depends on the leadership. There, I've said my piece.
So Michelle Lau at Emory, I don't know, I've always thought that you were good at this. How is it in the department, the medical school, the university?
So, I mean, I think we've been very, very successful on the department level. But I mean, it's been a lot of intentionality and a lot of people creating a culture of inclusion for the last 20 years. I mean, it's not like one day you're like, we're gonna really intentionally recruit to increase our equity and diversity and inclusion, and it just happens, right? It's, Cassie said it before, it's like diversity begets diversity, right? So I come and I interview and I see people that look like me and I'm like, that'd probably be a pretty good place to go, right? Or I'm an applicant for residency and I look at the, little collage of the residents, I'm like, there's a lot of people there that look like me. So on the department level, I think we've had a lot of success, particularly with recruiting Black and African American applicants. We do struggle a little bit still with Hispanic applicants. We just don't, and Latino applicants, we just don't have I don't know why, because Atlanta has a very large Spanish speaking population, but we seem to still struggle with getting that group to leave some of the other spots that they are. In terms of the School of Medicine, it's really interesting. I sit on a steering committee actually for the School of Medicine, and the School of Medicine on a whole is probably not very diverse, and there's a lot of differing opinions on how to achieve that. There's groups that want things that are specific to faculty versus trainees and students versus staff, and then there's an argument from others that it should all be inclusive of everybody, right? That's the point. So we're stuck in the weeds a little bit trying to make a strategic plan. And we have a new dean in the medical school who's very, very research focused and frankly kind of misses some of these things. So it's been a pretty big push to try to, get some traction and momentum on these things. So I feel lucky to be in the department that I'm in within Emory, and we have other departments that are relatively successful. But we went for a while, I think, where the Department of Radiology had one faculty member of color and no residents of color. So, I mean, it's not across the system yet, but maybe in the future.
John, how's it in Wisconsin?
Yeah, there's been over the last 2 to 3 years, there's been a lot of work being done, both at the medical school level and also within our department. A lot of it has been just raising awareness about the concepts that we've been talking about this morning. There have been a number of just within the last year, a number of workshops that both the institution and also our department have held for kind of dealing with identifying microaggression, dealing with microaggression. The school has been hosting conversations with the VP for diversity and inclusion. So there's a lot of work. I think more work being done on the consciousness raising side, more so than kind of the taking action side. But I think that's evolving.
And then Michelle Blanda, I don't know, speak to where you are now, speak to where you used to be, just in this vein.
So I think in regards to where I used to be in an academic setting, yes, we struggled, and it wasn't, sometimes we were successful. I remember one time, we had an all class of male residents, and when I interviewed the next year, someone said to me, as the chairman, do you not support having, diversity in your program? And it was kind of like, I didn't know what to say, because we, made every attempt to try to create the program to be diverse. However, I am in corporate America now. So I work for Centene Corporation. It's one of the largest providers of Medicaid, Medicare throughout the country. And let me tell you, one of the things that happens there is every day we are taught to embrace diversity, to learn about diversity, to learn about microaggression. They have constant educational sessions, constant inclusive meetings where you're meeting different people. And so they're really, the intent is quite strong. And so one of the things when I hear everyone talk, I worry medicine is going to fall behind. If we do not embrace this, we are going to fall behind. And we have always had a position of authority and kind of people believing what we say. But if we cannot connect with the people, we will lose that. So we need to take this quite seriously.
It's interesting to hear this. A little bit of me is, oh, good. I thought we were the only ones that didn't face these issues. And, Phil, I think about Stanford, and I know of, some of the formal work that is being done at your university or the medical school on diversity and inclusion. And I look at Stanford as, oh, this is a model place. They teach it well. Michelle down at Emory. Yes, I know your department quite well. And, it took you like you said, it probably took you 20 years to get to where you are. Intentionality, growth over time. I hear all of these things and think, okay, on the one hand, that's good. I'm not really all that different. Phil, I'd say the same thing about where we are. Mostly, I just feel like, wow, if this is happening at every institution on a bigger scale, maybe a department is good. So we have some departments that are good, many that aren't so good, at least in terms of diversity. It's discouraging because, especially for those of us who have been around, well, actually, all of us here now have been around for at least some time. And, not a whole lot has changed.
Right.
Well, I'll add that our medical school has done a lot in recruiting medical students. So getting students out of college, university into medical school, and has really made big inroads into diversity. And our current first year class of medical students is, I want to say, almost half UIM, or 38, 45, some percent. I can't remember what it is, some very big number compared to where we used to be. And I think that has to be the start. I mean, you've got to bring people through. We talk about the pipeline, and we're excited by that. And then we're making efforts to try and keep them within our residencies and keep them once they finish residency. That's the hard part. A lot of people want to leave after spending 4, 5, 6 years in medical school at Stanford. So it's a complex problem.
How has the last year, I look at the death of George Floyd last May. We have it really, I don't know, jumped our diversity and inclusion efforts all along. In my world, I've been talking about, we need to do this, we need to do that. And it's almost like a broken record. And then all of a sudden it became really important. We made great strides. I mean, we've really done probably more in the last year than we had in the preceding 6 years, as far as all of this. We have an anti-racism component of our medical school education, which we did some things, but it has jumped greatly. I'm just kind of curious, how has the last year been in terms of your trajectory of improvement?
I would agree with you that the last year has been, compared to the previous decade, has been amazing. I mean, it really has moved things forward a lot. And I think, it was a precipitating event, and we were able to capitalize on it in some way, try and get some positive out of it. And I think we are making some progress, but we're still not there, and we still have a long way to go.
And it's interesting that, besides that being such a huge catalyst, I think with, the shift to, using Zoom and virtual platforms, I think that's made it easier in some sense for people, for people to host conferences, and for people, it's kind of lowered the bar for people to be able to attend.
And I do think the political scenario that occurred over these past years did separate people. So, you talked about speaking out. There were times people didn't want to speak out because they didn't want to create conflict, because the people had such strong political views. Hopefully some of that has quieted down. But one of the things I can say is corporate America is putting money behind this. And if, the idea so that you want your workforce to look like the population that you're serving, that is hard to achieve, and you're going to have to put money behind it.
Yeah, they aren't putting a lot of money to it at
Right.
our institution. Look, not going to badmouth ours. I can't. They have invested. They definitely have invested. I'm thankful for what has been done, but my concern is it's just not enough.
No.
And I get it. Pandemic. We lost a lot of money. There's not money to be had, but we haven't put the necessary resources to make it happen.
And can we keep the emotional pressure or not emotional, but can we keep the pressure going? Can we keep the momentum going? We built up some momentum in the last year. Will it progress, or are we going to fizzle out until the next disaster? It's our next tragedy. You want to keep the pressure on those who make the decisions to keep moving forward. And as we said in our diversity subcommittee from the faculty senate last night, diversity happens one retirement at a time in some respects. And I'm on the glide path. So as soon as I'm out of there, hopefully they're going to replace me with someone who doesn't look like me. That's kind of my goal.
And at the same time, I'll argue that we have an obligation. It is not something we're doing. It's something we are obligated to do to create a better workforce to serve the population, because the people who serve cannot do their best job if they don't understand where the public is kind of coming from. And so if I am so different from you, it is very hard for me to understand your point of view. And like I said, in the company that I work for, because we have a Medicaid population, we have different populations of ethnicity who really have much different needs than any of us have ever, we've seen a lot in the emergency department, but the fact of the matter is you really, unless you've lived in those environments, so you have to have people who come from those environments, who've learned in those environments, who can relate to those people to serve them. And that will make our society a better place.
Well, and there's research to back that up too. So hopefully that,
Right.
The science will help to push.
Yeah, and then if we, it's very complicated, then so tying it back to, kind of the topic of the day, what are biases and microaggressions? There's so many, complex, what are the structures that are in place? You know, you think back, well, we really need to start this in kindergarten, you know, that you have to really start far back. We're working on more of the tail end when people have made the decisions of this is what I'm going to do for my life. So it just makes it very difficult. And then you add in all of the biases. And then when you think about some of the things that Ron and Cassie presented, you know, it's very difficult. It's very challenging because there's so many aspects of it that you've got to tackle. And where do you start? Phil, you know, it's interesting because on the East Coast, just in general, Stanford is considered, you know, oh, you do things well. You're the West Coast's Harvard or vice versa. So, and I know of efforts that you have done. LA is with you, right? Alvarez, is he with you?
Right. LA. Oh yeah, LA's one of yeah, he's one of our faculty members.
Yeah, but you know, I hear about the stuff that you do. I've seen things that have come out at the AAMC level. You know, so I've seen that. So we think, oh wow, they're doing great things on the West Coast, and I think that's a good thing. You know, you're certainly the efforts there. But then when I hear you say, yeah, our diversity has not been good, I think, well, good. We're doing not as much, and we're in the same boat as you. So it's just very interesting to hear that. You know, and you know, I think as long as I've been around, I think, well, so what are we going to do this year that somebody hasn't thought about in the last 30 years?
Well, you know, it's a good question, and I think a lot of really smart people now at our school are taking a good look at this and coming up with some thoughtful ideas. As I said, we have a diversity subcommittee on the Senate, and we have written up proposals. We've made requests. We are putting together. We've actually met with a handful of the chairs of departments who have been doing really well, and finding out what their best practices are, and trying to come up with a document that we can share with the school on kind of our perception of what good practices are within individual departments. Part of the problem we have is the hiring is done really at the department level. The chairs make a determination of what the needs are, and some are more have a better lens on diversity than others. And Andra's been terrific. I mean, she's really come in and made a lot of changes that we didn't have before, quite frankly, and it has made major improvements. We've hit targets that we have set for ourselves in a year and a half that we had set 5-year goals for in recruitment. So it's been great in many ways, but as I keep saying, we're not there yet as a school. We have some departments that have very few UIM faculty, and within the university in general, there are some schools in the university, like the School of Engineering, for instance, that is even worse than the School of Medicine as far as their diversity. So we have a long way to go. And Palo Alto, you know, Stanford is I know it's got a reputation for doing a lot of things right, but they are some things that they could do righter or better.
So actually, so is this session that we're supposed to have, like, what are next steps? What can we do? You know, I'm curious. Now we have Nexer back. Nexer, we got you back. So we have a kind of a medical student view. You're certainly far more at the beginning of your career. Ava is in, I guess, middle part. So we have different views. So I'm curious, what can we do? I mean, session today was on bias. What are things that we can do? What would you take back to your institution, your department, your institution? What would you take back from here? What would you say we need to do?
Something that would definitely recommend is to be able to do the training during the orientation session on how to be an ally. On what does an ally look like? We talked about diversity in the terms of skin color for half the time, but then we don't really address the gender roles and individuals who are transitioning or like, different forms of like the spectrum. So my thought would be how to be an ally, how does that look in terms of microaggression and everything else? As far as like increasing diversity in an institution, my takes on that is basically start from the beginning. I'm not sure if you remember with Dr. Canada, he did the 100 block section in Harlem, in which he goes from like the cradle to occupation type of mindset, where he fosters those individuals and those students and open up the doors. So I think it's just going to the beginning and helping the students know that you have a chance of mastering. Yes, it's a long road. You won't make money in the beginning, first 10 years of your life, but you'll eventually be rewarded with it.
How about you, Ava? What do you think? What do you think we should be doing, and what would you take back to your place? And you've again, you certainly, your department has done good things with regards to diversity and inclusion. I don't know what your institution is like, but what do you think we should do, and what would you take back?
One of the big things we've discussed is like education. So educating everyone, not just those that come to sessions like we are coming to currently. I agree, allyship is really, really important. I like Nexter's point, having this type of education on day one for everyone, I think will help us understand the importance of DEI for everyone, from the business aspect to caring for our patients, to making it a better environment for our colleagues. So I agree, starting on day one with education for new faculty hires, not just the faculty, but also the staff, not just the medical students, the faculty. So education for everyone.
Yeah, that's a good, good points. I can tell you how at Jefferson, we start on day one, meaning, at first year orientation as part of their activities, we start with unconscious bias and race as a social determinant of health. It's one of the few actual lectures that we do during orientation week. So we've got, we can do far more with the students. There's a curriculum, we can pepper it throughout. We're trying to embed it. Our biggest challenge is how do we do that for faculty, right? Some of it is the time, clinical pressures, some of the attitude of, we'll teach the students because I already know this already. That is one of our bigger challenges. We're trying to get around that. That when I showed this morning that video, it came from a module that every faculty, because every employee in our organization has to take that. We recognize that just because you take it doesn't mean that you learn it. It could mean that, well, you sat there and you clicked the buttons and you moved it forward and you took the test and you completed it. But we've tried to figure out ways. How do you get somebody to learn? And it's like, you kind of have to want to learn, but we force the issue some. We figure, well, this is more interesting than the fire safety module that everybody has to take. But that is a big challenge, is how do we get everybody on the same page? And it takes a lot of work. Coming to sessions like this, it's great for the people that are here. But then I look at the people that are here and I think, okay, this is the choir. Right. And it's all good. It's all good because a lot of me, what I've learned is you have to really teach the choir well, because they're the ones who are going to teach it to others. The cynics, don't even waste your time. You'll never change their mind. So It does start with things like this, and then the challenge is trying to figure out ways to get it out to more people, so that you just build your choir, or at least the supporting cast of the choir. You build it more.
And possibly even when you're building, always have like a space where they decompress. I mean, I usually equate microaggressions like small little paper cuts. At the end of the day, um, it hurts. They hurt a lot. So you have to like regenerate your skin so you could start a new day tomorrow. So with that being said, maybe add some type of like healing type of substance that when you preach into the choir, you're giving them the hope that this will be better tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think that, I was gonna say the tips that you gave in your talk on dealing with microaggressions, I think are gonna be really helpful. I think people here will probably have thought about it and have been doing things similar to that, but at least now they've got, here's a kind of CPR, we can do this, and we'll bring it back to where we're working.
Yeah, we were trying to find a way, something very practical. We want people to speak up. We want it to be very practical. So yes, all of us here should remember CPR. So that was and for us, the way we approach diversity and inclusion at Jefferson is we're really looking at it mostly from the inclusion. You've got to have an inclusive environment first. These are the people that we have now. We want it to be inclusive. And then the hope is that people from the outside see, hey, they're inclusive and they value me for the identity that I bring. And when we work on things like unconscious bias and microaggression, we're simply trying to create an environment that is much more thoughtful and much more inclusive. So hence that was the idea of our chief diversity officer. She's been around for a year now, and some of the things she has put into place, her focus is really around inclusion. Yes, we pay attention to diversity, but her feeling is you have to have an inclusive environment. We don't want to increase diversity, and then when we bring people in, they're in an environment that's not, that doesn't value them. We just said we would rather just not be diverse because we don't want to bring people in and then have them not have a good experience. So, why we do the work in unconscious bias and microaggressions. All right. What else? It's been a long day.
It's been fascinating. I pulled a boomer this morning and couldn't figure out how to get into the meeting, so took me a while, and I missed the beginning. But what I've seen has been really helpful.
Well, good to hear. That is what we're trying to do. So it was nice. I think we had pretty much the attendance that we thought we were going to have, at least who signed up. I'd like to think that the breakout room's a chance. It would have been so much better in person, but it is what it is. And I hope we had some good discussion. Nice to hear that we're not so far behind Stanford. So, okay, we're still kind of in the same boat. So we have long ways to go.
I think medicine in general has got a long way to go. I don't think it's specific to any one institution. I think there are a handful of institutions that are doing really well, but not many. And I think that we all have a long way to go.
Next, sir, do you see hope? Do you see hope as you're going to become a physician?
There's days that the future is very bright, and there's some days that I'm wondering, like, where are we going?
Where are you in school next, sir?
I'm in Ross University. I graduate in I think 10 days from now.
Oh,
22nd.
at Rush, huh?
Yes.
I used to be faculty there many years ago.
Oh, cool. Oh, we're in Barbados now. The hurricane kind of blew our school away.
What?
The hurricane, they blew our school away, so we.
Oh, I thought you said Rush. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, Ross.
Oh, Ross. I was at Rush. Sorry, my
Oh,
mistake.
Ross. Okay.
But the hurricane did blow your school away. It's true.
Oh, boy. Talk about a challenge.
Yeah.
You
At least it
live
wasn't
and learn.
snow. Yeah.
I'd rather have snow sometimes than a hurricane.
How has the island recovered?
I have no clue. Afterwards they went to, was it Barbados? Yeah, they went to Barbados ultimately, and I've been in the States for clinicals. So my goal is to go back to Dominica and be able to just enjoy that island, sense the pressure of medical school, and just marvel in nature.
Ava, where are you? I don't think I've met you officially.
Hi, I'm at UT Southwestern in Dallas. I think so many great points have been brought up today, but I think you're really, really right. Medicine in general is so far behind like the business world. And I think the business world adopted DEI because of the fact that business and finances, and they figure out it was going to make the financial aspect of it improve. So I agree. I guess it's just one step at a time, but you hope that we keep moving medicine in the right direction.
I think the comparison to corporate America is interesting. And they've made changes that I think people didn't quite anticipate initially. And I think Michelle was making the comments earlier about her corporation and what they're doing. So I guess we're all tired of baby steps. We really want to make big steps. And
Yeah, it's when you've done this long enough, it just gets sometimes tiring. Okay, we're saying the same things, and we're really trying hard, and yet sometimes you just want to see something big happen so that there's some big change, as opposed to, okay, we did this before, we're going to tweak it, and yeah, we increased the percentage by 0.03%.
Yeah. It was good to me.
Because everybody else must be having heated discussions too.
This happened last time with group 1. Like, they were in early and confused about where everyone was, so just give them a minute.
I love it when stuff works. Y'all saw the little countdown, putting you back in the big room. It's the little things, folks. It's the little things, okay? Here in 2021, I'm going to get excited about things like the breakout rooms working. So we're going to recap what each group talked about. And since I'm already talking and I'm group 1, I'm going to go first. Hey! So For group one, we put Dr. Lopez's presentation to work. We talked a lot about how not the same technique doesn't work for every encounter. So we talked about some specific microaggressions. So we had a patient in the emergency department who only wants to be seen by an American doctor. It's kind of hard to assume good intent with that, but I think we kind of moved it along to like assume that they're a good person, not necessarily good intent, which helps when you have to do your own asking of the questions, because tone is important, right? So you can ask the most benign question, but if you say it in a sarcastic manner, they're not going to respond well to that. So like that particular patient, our thought was to ask, well, what do you mean by American when you say you want to only see American doctors? And his response is something along the lines of, like, I just, my last doctor, I didn't understand what they said to me when I was in the hospital. So he had difficulty understanding accents, which is not necessarily the same thing as American. But we wouldn't have known that if we didn't ask. So he got informed that everybody is an American doctor, so if it's all right with him, somebody will be happy to see him in just a few minutes, and everything went kind of fine. But it's kind of hard to explain, to assume good intent with something along those lines. So we applied some different techniques, and we talked about practicing humility and how hard that is when we ourselves accidentally are the aggressor in this situation, sometimes from lack of knowledge and sometimes for you were stressed and something silly just came out of your mouth. And so what it's like when someone has to call you out on it and how that makes you feel. So.
Cool. I guess I'll go next if there aren't any questions for Dr. Bradby. Seeing no hands go up or nothing go into the chat box for Dr. Bradby, then I'll go ahead and do group two. So we actually had a scenario where we discussed, we were at a resident clinical competency committee, and we're reviewing one of our female residents, and the concept of her behavior came up, in which one of the faculty members described the female resident as being loud and also as being uppity. And so we use Dr. Lopez's technique, so you'll get like a lot of repetition. Again, this is part of the practicing and understanding how to do this. Was one, just to person who experienced the microaggression did speak up, and they were very, humble, or acting in humility as to what was going on, and asking, well, what do you mean by uppity? Can you describe what uppity is? Or can you tell me examples of that person being loud? So not only just, being humble, not putting the person who committed the microaggression on the defensive, but also trying to get some clarifying information. Like, can you please clarify what you meant by uppity? And to also give some specific behaviors of what these things that you consider to be bad or not ideal in this resident. So did they, and compare them with some of the other groups. So it was also like, I don't think that this is just representative of female or female residents, but you could also apply this to male residents. So she broadened the scope that this applied to everyone, and that this was not just one particular group or one particular person that actually does this. The conversation was like a very friendly exchange. Again, it was assuming good intent throughout the whole entire process, which we all recognize could be very difficult, and just trying to get to the root cause of why this person felt that way. And lastly, again, there's more than one way to actually to speak up, but the clarifying question actually worked in our group the best for this scenario. Dr. Bradby, actually, you're on mute.
Because I was laughing.
You did it.
On mute.
You did it.
You know, we had to have the phrase come out, and it had to be my fault. So we talked about, so we did actually, I don't know, a couple scenarios. We did one about the one that I had done in the beginning, the patient who didn't think they were seen by a physician, yet they had been seen by 3 women. You know, we talked about that, how one approaches it. In some ways, you know, the direct, you know, I was your doctor, you know, or, you know, that person is a doctor coming from, say, somebody else, coming from a male. We talked a little bit about that, the ask a question. You know, so what one, we were kind of debating whether the question of, if you know, do you ask the patient, so what in your mind do you envision when you think of a doctor? Clearly there's it's a question, it's a technique. We're not sure that we would ask that particular question. And some of it just has to do with what's the particular relationship. I think it's very different, a patient-physician relationship versus maybe physician to physician, like faculty to faculty. They're different. So it's trying to figure out, well, what are the right questions that one might ask? We tried to do a role play. I'm not real great at doing this. I hate being the one that's the microaggressor, because it's certainly not in my nature, even though I know I do them. But I pretended to be a chair offering a leadership position, but saying, yeah, but I'm a little concerned about the fact that you have kids and you might have to take care of them. And then talking about a response. So the acknowledging good intent. I'm not sure it's so much calling out the injury, but certainly acknowledging good intent and trying to focus the discussion around qualifications rather than you know, something at home that may impact on it. So we talked about that, and then we also talked a little bit about using allies, you know, somebody else that's not you, whether it be because of the dynamics of a group, or simply just another group. You know, we talked about a male resident saying to the patient, that is your doctor, and how just, you know, how good that could feel because it's supportive and you have somebody that's acting as an ally.
Thanks,
All
Bernie.
right. And just so you know, that I don't know, I put in the chat box for everybody, I mentioned an article that really goes through how you disarm microaggression. So it's by Daryl Wing Su. To me, it's the best paper. He's got a couple textbooks, and it's just tough to read textbooks on this, but this is a paper that was published, and it goes through, what do you do if you're a bystander, if you're the victim of, if you're the microaggressor, and there's science to it as well. So I just wanted to make sure that you had that paper. Hopefully you can pull it off the chat room. I often had trouble getting that off, but it's there in the chat room just so you have the science about it. Again, we would talk about it this whole morning, then you're going to walk away and say, wait, how do I do that? Or what do I do? This is just another paper that just further reinforces, gives some of the science. We actually had Daryl Wing Su come to our institution. He gave a talk to us, and then we had the opportunity to talk with him about, you know, what does he do where he is? And he said, oh, we have a whole, like a graduate school course for the business school. I think it was at Columbia. And their final exam was to deal with a microaggression. And despite the fact that they had been studying this for an entire semester, all of the participants had a very difficult time with dealing with that microaggression. So it just really just to underscore how hard this really is, how much practice it actually takes. It's just not really easy to do, but at least if you're armed, if you think about it, plan it ahead, come up with your script, so to speak, have this knowledge. It will hopefully help you as you're trying to work through how you actually deal with microaggressions.
Great. So we're actually kind of like on time. We're a little bit ahead of time. Are there any comments for Dr. Lopez about the speaking up techniques? Good. Seeing none, then I will turn this over to Dr. Bradby.
I am working on sharing my screen. I have 3 screens going, so let's see if we can share the right one. So, share screen. Fabulous. Great. So, we talked a little bit earlier about there being a lot of discussion about racism in academia, particularly this year. There's been a lot of social media discussion. You've seen it in the news. You've seen it not only there, but you've seen it in pretty much every academic conference that I have followed on Twitter this year has had whole sections on diversity, inclusion, and racism and health disparities in medicine. So I think it's important to just kind of look at what what those impacts have been this year and what has been heavily discussed, because this is what our learners are talking about. This is what our applicants to medical school are seeing. And these are the things that they're considering when they're thinking about taking a job, not only in academic medicine, which we sometimes don't make look as exciting as it kind of is, and whether or not they even want to be a doctor. So one of the big stories that got covered this year was Dr. Princess Denner, the first and only Black female program director at Tulane, had a well-publicized case on social media this year about race and gender discrimination there. She actually brought a court case against Tulane about patterns of denigration, harassment, retaliation, professional abuse that went on for about, I think, 11 to 13 years. She talked about how her minority residents were treated differently, that they had an inequitable educational experience, they had harder rotations. There was even discussion from the residents about how as a combo program, because she is the Med Peds program director, the program director for medicine or the program director for peds would make it impossible for her residents to get the rotations that they needed to actually fulfill their program. So like you have to have it a certain amount of time in the PICU, certain amount of time in the medical ICU, that kind of thing. And she was not granted the same grace as or same power as her predecessors in terms of driving her own academic curriculum for her residents. When she actually took on the role as program director for Med Peds, the person who's now the GME dean said, look, we don't want to change the face of Tulane, and I'm afraid that white medical students wouldn't follow or rank favorably a program with a Black director. And so they actually made it so that she wasn't the program director solo, she was made co-program director with a white male, so that they felt like she wouldn't be the only face of the program to make the applicants more comfortable. In addition, Tulane had forced them to use a ranking tool that specifically discounts historically Black colleges and universities and puts them at a disadvantage in comparison to their medical student peers. And so I think that her case talks a lot about the tool itself, about recruitment, and about how her residents were treated. To read the entire document, which I think is like 27-ish pages, is whoa. I think it is hard to reconcile that is still happening, not only like now, but like for the past decade, right? Like I personally had felt like we had made some progress, right? Like in the past, however many years, like since the 1960s, and to some degree, I guess we have made progress, but we're definitely not all the way there. So that's like the biggest one I know that has been talked about in social media. They had students talking about how they weren't going to rank Tulane. They had hashtag DNR Tulane going on Twitter for some time. And then when you think about like her particular case, it's hard not to think about the structural hierarchy of academic medicine and who's at the top of that, and like what do they hold valuable, and how does that affect everybody below them. You have to think about recruitment and retention of underrepresented minority faculty, and how that affects your residents, how that affects your community, how that affects your students. There's a saying that diversity begets diversity, right? So the more diversity you have at your program, the easier it is to try and recruit additional people of diverse backgrounds. I think it speaks to your program's openness and inclusiveness when you have that. So it's hard to recruit diversity when you don't have much diversity. So I think like when you consider a lot of these cases, this is what people are talking about. Like when rank lists came out this year, did y'all notice after the match, if y'all are social media people, people actually looked at people's match list and were like, oh, this program had so much diversity, there's no diversity at this program, and it was commented on and retweeted and all kinds of stuff. And so like from a PR standpoint, these things really do matter. It matters to your patients and it matters to the people that you're trying to recruit. So just things to keep in mind. Dr. Aisha Curry from, I believe is Kaiser Permanente in Pasadena. She was asked to give a discussion in a small group this past year on implicit bias. I think it was 8 people in her small group. And they did a class discussion on racial bias and health disparities back in August. Within 9 hours of that small group occurring, she was actually suspended without explanation from school based on, they said it was based on a student complaint. The 8 students that were in her class actually came out with a response letter on social media that they had also sent to the dean and other administrators at their institution, that they never felt uncomfortable in the room, that they felt like it was a good discussion, and that they support Dr. Curry and want her back. Her suspension lasted for 18 weeks, and it ended with them telling her that her contract there was not renewed. No clear reason for that suspension was ever given. They specifically stated, though, that that she was not suspended because of the conversation on health disparities that she had with her small group, but they never actually explained why it was that she was suspended and not renewed. So this is still going on. So when you think about like her situation, you think about school curriculum and policies, it makes you think about speaking up and like, what is the retaliation for speaking up? Like what happens when you put yourself out there to say, you know what, this is wrong? Are you going to be promoted? Are you going to be fired? And how does that work? That also affects recruitment. There's a lot of conversation about whether or not you should go to Kaiser Permanente's medical school because of that. It makes you think about equity and equality and how much work we're going to need to do to help dismantle kind of the current policies and curricula that make this happen. And then in 2018, Dr. Abba Oseo Asare et al. Came out with a paper looking at minority resident physician views on the role of race and ethnicity in their training experiences in the workplace. So this paper was in JAMA. And our own emergency medicine doctor, Dr. Jowan Boatwright, was involved in this paper. So they interviewed 27 resident physicians at the SNMA conference that come from 21 different residency programs, 19 of which were Black, 3 Hispanic residents, 1 Native American, 4 mixed race, 3 ethnicity residents, and 15 of which happened to be female. So they kind of span the gamut there. And they looked at qualitative data on what our residents are experiencing in the workplace as a result of academic racism. And so they talked a lot about the minority tax. So they feel othered and some pressure to assimilate. Like when you think about that, that's like, you know, straightening your hair and trying to like blend in. But at the same time as they're feeling othered, they're also being pressured to be very involved in diversity initiatives and committees and recruitment. They talked a lot about there's a whole section of this paper that talks about Black people fixing Black people problems and the pressure for them to be involved in a lot of the diversity initiatives at their institution, while at the same time not really feeling part of the institution. They talked about being confused for other people and other people being sometimes the nutrition staff, the transporter, but they specifically talked about how if there was someone else of similar background, how they would be confused for that person, even though they look nothing at all alike. And so how that made it hard to know where you were in residency and how you were doing, because is your evaluation actually about you or is it about the other person? Because they were confused for each other so often. They talked some about explicit bias and about how people assume that they are of lower status, thinking about like, when you're confused for nutrition staff, can you go get me some coffee, that kind of thing. Fearing repercussions, how hard it was for them to report discrimination. So like if you are trying to go to an office to report something, it's hard to do it during the business day because you are also rounding and doing patient care and there's really no time for that. Or even like not even knowing who the ombuds person is because they're from a different service and are not readily available. So it looks like a lot of the things that, you know, we as faculty are experiencing, so are our residents. And so how do we make their residency experience be a more positive experience? There is an article that I saw yesterday about I believe she's a neurology resident in New York City, who says she's not going to her graduation. She has no intention to show up to her residency graduation because she had no positive experiences in residency to make her feel like this was a celebration. She was like, it was like walking through a war for her 3 or 4 years in residency, and she is literally just glad to be done and that she didn't feel like there was anything to celebrate. So I think it's important to think about like what everybody's experiences in residency and how it might be very, very divergent depending on where you are in your background and what is going on. And so kind of in summary, I talked about a lot of this, but thinking about particularly in terms of our residents, thinking about their experience in terms of pervasive discrimination, experiencing lower expectations from their supervisors, suffering harsher consequences for mistakes and for reporting sometimes, feeling socially isolated from their peers. And if you ever like just have some free time and are just interested, if you follow hashtag Black in the Ivory on Twitter, it is amazing to hear people's experiences in not only academic medicine, but in academics overall, like it's PhDs and everybody else in academic, in the academy, kind of talking about their experience and what it was like to jump all the hurdles and some of the very interesting things that have been said to people during recruitment. Like it is legit flooring. So I think knowing that these things are occurring, that this is what our students and learners are exposed to, and that this is becoming more and more publicized and more well-known and recognized, and that we as educators are actually going to need to find ways to address these things, because otherwise like we're never going to bridge that gap. Like I saw it yesterday show up on several social media sites about how we have not improved the number of Black men in medicine in the past several decades. I think it is similar right now as it was, I believe, in 1973. So like if we don't start trying to address some of these things, we're not gonna make it better. So let's see, stop share. Yes, success. So where do we go from here is a bit of the conversation that we're going to have in our breakout rooms, and maybe like discussing some of the stuff that we've all kind of been seeing and hearing about, because I know for sure like I wasn't aware of some of the things that I've been seeing being publicized recently, and there's probably a lot more things that we haven't even heard about because nobody has put themselves out there. So how can we take these experiences and work towards like a better clinical learning environment for us all? I don't see her. Where'd she go? SAM staff, where'd you go?
I'm here.
Oh, there we are. I have 2 pages now.
Yeah. So the next part of this exercise breakout room is called Exploring the Impact of Stereotypes and Biases in Academic Medicine. You know, hopefully through this conversation as a small group, we'll come up with at least some, I won't say solutions, but at least have a better idea of how we might be able to address these issues. So for example, you know, the leaky pipeline and all those type of things. What are some of your ideas to improve that? What are some of your ideas to improve or to make evaluations fair and equitable? So those are some of the things that we aim to do in the next session. All
Okay,
right.
so are we ready to go to the breakout rooms? All right, I will start moving people over. It'll take a few seconds.